Hi, everyone. This is Rohit from Lifestyle Mastery, and today I'm excited to have Alex Simon, who's the CEO of Elude, which is a travel search engine and app that allows people to discover and book unique travel packages based only on your budget and data. Prior to starting Elude, Alex worked on Wall Street at Morgan Stanley and Deutsche Bank and used every holiday and weekend to find a new city or country to travel to. Welcome to the show, Alex.
Thank you so much for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Awesome. So, uh, before starting Elude, how did you get into this, crazy world of startups, and what was your, journey all about?
Yeah, so I like to say that I kind of stumbled into entrepreneurship. I definitely did not find myself being kind of the guy growing up to say, I'm going to start a business. I think actually after college and university, I jumped right into, as you said, kind of investment banking. So I went right into New York, played around, I guess you could say, between Morgan Stanley and Deutsche Bank. And I think actually based off of just that experience alone, I started to realize that my passion wasn't aligned with what I was actually doing day in and day out. And so, that starts to get, a little bit more powerful as you start to go again in your career and find out what you actually want to do. And, for me, entrepreneurship was kind of those first few years of finding out what was my passion. Again, at the time, it was much more in the line of travel and being able to just explore new places and see things. And then that kind of evolved me into starting Elude, with my co-founder and really kind of honing in on what it meant to travel the way that we like to, which again is, as you put it, kind of budget based. Being able to basically see different travel options based solely on what you're looking to spend.
Interesting, because I remember there was this boom of nomad travel where the lot of traveling which is happening in Southeast Asia and South America, but I think the problem that you're trying to solve is for millennials and people who want to book travel according to their budget. But why do you think booking is so time consuming? The Expedias and the Booking.com are trying to solve the problem, but where do you think are the obstacles?
Yeah, I think especially from our user standpoint, you hit it right on the head. I mean, millennials are definitely our demographic. Um, and I like to actually take a step back and say, outside of just the booking process in general, that's pretty daunting. It almost becomes a big to do on, in and of itself. It's not fun. Expedia, Priceline, these companies don't make it interesting to try to find new places. It's more of just kind of like, it's like you're going to a restaurant and you're ordering something and then you're just getting delivered this food, right? They're not making it kind of the experience that we feel like it should be. And so, what we like to do is kind of add a little bit more personalization to it, learn more about kind of how you like to travel as kind of a foundation. And if you kind of compare us to like, older days of kind of travel and, travel agents, we want to learn more about that individual and try to kind of better, provide city options for what that person actually wants. And then, from the time consuming angle for travel, I think it really goes back down to people just don't really know where they could afford to get to. I think that's actually what we're discovering most is that, it takes a lot of time, energy to do a lot of these searches. And people just want to go with what's tried and true, right? So they go to the same place 10 or 12 times. They don't really look for an upcoming weekend that maybe they have 3 days off, because it takes a lot of energy to find these options. And that's what we're most excited about, is trying to condense that and kind of package things up to make people really excited about traveling again.
Interesting. And are you geography agnostic? And in the sense, are you only in US, or are you trying to solve the problems in other areas, other geographies as well?
Great question. So in the current form, it's actually, we're not necessarily only US specific. We do have a few planned launches middle of this year for a US kind of centric launch. But as far as kind of Elude in the way that we've built, again, our backend and our technology, we're actually quite global. And I think the problem that we're solving for, which is again, kind of being able to see options based off of your budget, actually transcends globally, right? So this is a problem that's not just US specific. I also think Europe and I would say more or less Asia has a much better idea around what those weekend travels are and our goal actually is to kind of bring that mentality to the American. That's that's a big milestone for us, but I think that's definitely the route that we're trying to take here.
Got it. I've lived in Asia. I'm in Europe right now. Are there any cities or any places you would recommend for listeners in Europe and in Asia? Which you feel that I mean, we're in the COVID times, but which you feel a great places which are still not being found out.
Yeah, I mean, the traditional like Barcelona's, Prague's, of Europe, I think are incredible. I know as an American, it's again fairly inexpensive to get out to those locations. As far as Asia goes, I mean, my personal favorite is Japan and Singapore. We have a few investors out in Singapore, and again, it's just kind of this completely new. I grew up in New Jersey, New York area, so having kind of a new city to explore and see. Singapore is definitely top of list there. And then, I mean, again, more personally from vacation wise, I would say Bali or again Thailand. I mean, I've been back a handful of times, and those places are very special to me. Just again, trying to break away from kind of the traditional places to travel.
No, absolutely. I think Thailand, Bali, Singapore are great places. I've been to all these places, and they're quite different from Europe and US for sure. And yeah, I want to talk about Elude's revenue model. How do you make money? Is it more like a B2C centric product, or do you also have a B2B product also linked there?
So I think in the future state, we'll definitely go into B2B. I think in the current form, it's definitely only been B2C. And I like to actually preface this with, it's fairly difficult in travel to make money. So I'll start there, right? You either need to have, gone through hell in terms of regulatory requirements, or have a large user base. And with the large user base, you're basically acting on behalf of these other larger companies. So like, again, the Expedias of the world, to kind of push, a booking through. In travel, that's considered just affiliate based. That's how we started early on, and just trying to kind of prove out that people are able to search this way and actually kind of go in to proving out those first few metrics. Whereas in the current state, we've been through the hell of the regulatory requirements. So in this case, again, for anybody that's fairly versed in travel, we just became IATA accredited, ARC certified, which again gives us the right to kind of own that position and own the booking. And that's what we're most excited about, is that, again, we're kind of looking at travel differently, but we're also actually having a solution that matches the customer's needs, which is, looking and booking directly through one service.
Very interesting. And since you talked on metrics, I was wondering, like, somebody who's like a product manager, what are some of the KPIs you need to track when you're looking at being in a travel category? What's your North Star metric, especially when it comes to bookings and repeat bookings and all? What do you think is the most important
Yeah.
North Star metric for you?
Incredible that you kind of hit some of those. So I'll kind of run down a few of the metrics that, again, we continuously track, and I think become much more important as we start to scale. So, North Star, you kind of mentioned repeat customers and having people come back with the experience. That's definitely something that, is kind of top of mind for us outside of just traditional bookings. For anybody that's kind of not versed in the space, there's something called look to book ratio. And let me take a step back here and actually describe this, because this becomes fairly important in travel. Is there's always travelers who are looking, and then there's always travelers who are in the mindset of about to transact and book. I'd say 70, if not more than that, percent of searches come in the look category. So this is just genuine discovery. It's not it's not actually converting to a transaction. In our process flow, we look at how many times does someone actually do a search to convert to a transaction, and getting that number extremely low, so that again, we're providing real results for cities that people actually want to go to. That's again, top of mind for us. And then again, outside of kind of the traditional bookings, look to book, and repeat, cost of acquisition becomes extremely, I would say, a North Star when it comes to growth, right? So, yes, we just closed our kind of first, pre-seed funding. This gives us the ability and the ammo to really go out and prove and test out some of these, hypotheses. But as we start to scale, these larger organizations and specifically larger funds look at, how much does it actually cost to acquire? What ways are going, differently than the traditional travel agent, or again, these Expedias of the world, which, coming from our angle, we're very well positioned. We have a very great social approach and kind of organic side of this, but cost of acquisition becomes very, very kind of massive when it comes to the growth angle to building and scaling a travel startup.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think building a B2C travel business is not easy. But when you talk about the CAC angle, how do you plan to launch the product and make sure the CAC to LTV ratio is profitable going forward?
Yeah. So yeah, great question. So again, as a baseline, traditionally in travel, it's anywhere between $80 to $100 US when we're talking about customer acquisition. And so coming underneath that is a win kind of all day in our case. And so, again, as we've been building out our go-to-market strategy and coming up with ways that we can really kind of come in under that has been our top of mind. To go into a few of the details here. So, whether it be with influencers or again with partners, we feel like that's a huge avenue that has not actually been taken into consideration when you're seeing other travel companies, right? They don't traditionally go like I'll give the example, but if you go onto like Orbit's, Instagram right now, they have like 30 or 40,000, followers. It's nothing kind of mass scale. And I think this is a huge aspect in our case to really position ourselves quite nicely with whether it's lifestyle brands or again, influencers specifically in the travel space. And that's definitely the route that we've been taking. We have a large kind of following on that front, ready to be kind of activated once we go live. And then the partnership angle, right? So how we look at it more of how can we be different than the traditional travel agent? So not just partnering with hotels or airlines, actually going directly to brands that our customers actually want to interface with and interact with. So we have a lot of exciting things that are about to get kind of launched in these next few months, but again, right in line with kind of what the customer themselves actually want, from a brand.
Interesting. So I like how you cross pollinating with brands which cater to millennials. But since we are recording in the times of COVID, how much of travel has I mean, obviously the travel and hospitality industry has really affected. But what are your thoughts on going forward, especially during these times where times are uncertain, and even after post COVID, where do you see the travel journey going, and especially with millennials? Are they looking for a specific sort of experience or a journey other than the Gen Zs?
I think if I can put it bluntly, and then I can go into a little bit more detail. I think millennials just want to get the hell out. I think people and this actually is maybe outside of just millennials, right? This is people want something different. They don't want the same four walls that they've been living in the last year. And I genuinely believe, and again, we have pretty top, whether it's industry leaders on our board or on our investor, cap table, that have seen, things start to come back. I think we're starting to see that and feel that already. I mean, we're recording this kind of March 15th, right? So the last few weeks, we've been hitting over 1 million travelers on a daily basis here in the US. I consider that to be also a great proof point. It's still half of kind of what traditional travel was looking like prior to COVID. But specifically in our demographic, those are the individuals that are actually the first in line, right, so to speak, of traveling and getting away. We're also in this very interesting point in time when we're talking about corporations where people are not back in the office fully yet, right? And yes, schools are starting to open in some regions here in the US as well. But as that starts to, again, kind of open up, we foresee there's going to be a massive demand for people just looking to get away, even if that's the next state over, and experiencing something a bit unique. And so that's, again, what we're most excited about, is really trying to kind of provide this new way of traveling when the world starts to open back up.
Interesting. And I read somewhere from Airbnb that because there's not much of international travel which is happening, there's a lot of domestic travel which is happening, and fortunately, the experiences segment and the other market segment had really picked up. I think once the world starts opening up, I think a lot more international travel and travel will finally get to bounce back. Alex, I want to talk about when you since you've already raised your round of funding and you're looking to acquire talent. What are some of the biggest lessons you're learning when you come to acquire and retain talent? What are your thoughts? Because you've been in the corporate world from the investment side. What is it that you're looking for an early employee and you're looking to retain talent?
Great question. And I think, again, it's definitely hits right into kind of our current, current team. Right now we're growing. We're just over 10 or 15 people at this current form. And I think as we look towards the tail end of this year, again, continuing to grow the team is going to be a requirement. You also hit on kind of my previous corporate world, and I think the number one thing that we look for is not to just be kind of micromanaged and kind of have individuals that come in kind of looking for assistance. In that case, I think we want people to be curious. I mean, in again, myself and my co-founders point of view, the whole reason that Elude exists is because we were curious of kind of leaving the corporate world and going and exploring something new. And so that's what we look for in kind of the different talents is, why is someone interested in travel? Why are they interested in solving a pretty unique problem, but, fairly complex? And then, how does that look in the next few years? How can that individual come in as an early employee? And as you said kind of earlier, really grow the team and kind of instill a culture that exists that is, being shaped kind of every day. And so I know in our particular case, we're extremely excited about the team that we have right now. But I think as we continue to grow, it becomes that's the next piece that's exciting for us is really getting the right talent and growing the team to really kind of start changing the way that people are traveling.
Interesting. And we're all working out of our homes, and there's a lot of remote work which is happening. But I could see some of the bigger cities opening up, and some of the people are actually going back to offices, say 2 or 3 times in a week. But do you think the remote work culture would sustain, and especially in bigger cities, or do you think people going back to a 5-day work culture back to their offices?
I'm going to yeah. So I genuinely don't think that we'll go back kind of rubber band back to what we were prior to COVID. I think that there's a lot of legal requirements also that I feel like corporations are going to kind of take as far as precautions and definitely, make people feel comfortable as they enter back into the workforce. And I actually think too, this becomes extremely valuable to someone like, an Elude in this case for a business because, people yes are going to want to get back to what the normalcy was prior to COVID, but there's still going to be a lot of hesitation and also just different rules around if you can come back 3 or 4 times in the week. And what we're starting to find, and this is kind of in our subsection of of our group of members and users, but the digital nomad, yes, kind of started as someone who just doesn't care where they live and they're going to all these different locations and being a little bit more spontaneous. But I think what COVID actually, proved in our case specifically for a digital nomad is that there's so many variations to this, right? It could mean a month someplace or, 3 weeks, traveling and being at a new location and still being bunkered down in a hotel, but seeing and exploring a different location. And I think we're going to start to see some hybrid, I think, as the world, again, starts to open back up. And then last piece here, and this is just from my personal experience, having worked in the corporate side and kind of going into the travel and running, a fully digital and remote team, is I think, corporations and companies are going to have to be required to kind of shift that focus. We've already seen it, right? Where people are not required to go back into the office and work remote. But I think as, again, the world starts to open back up and people feel a little bit more accustomed to going back in, there's going to be this level of leniency, I think, that is going to be required from these corporations for people to go back in.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very interesting point, and especially in bigger cities, I'm seeing a lot of uh, talent leaving out of Silicon Valley. I don't know if that's happening in New York or not, but in bigger cities, people are definitely looking at smaller cities and going there and working, out of Zoom. Uh, do you think the same thing is happening in New York?
So I think New York, maybe Los Angeles too. You, so you have these massive hubs, right? That people are kind of getting away from and kind of experiencing new places. I think ultimately things will go back to somewhat of what it was in the past. That's just my gut reaction. I could be completely wrong, but I think the main reason that I bring that up is that there's a difference between working remotely and being someplace else through Zoom, and being able to, again, experience that culture or that city rather than actually in-person meetings. And I think as the world starts to, again, kind of open up in some way, in-person meetings are still going to be, they still feel different than a Zoom meeting. And so that's where you have these hubs of, New York or LA or even San Francisco that I think are almost unmatched. And I think, again, those will continue to be in a post-COVID era.
Got it. And when it comes to the era of Zoom meetings and remote work, how do you build more transparency in teams?
Yeah, so we've struggled with that personally, and I think what we realize is that as you're building a remote team, and in our case, again, we have half of our team out in Europe, some of them based here in the States, and we're actually working through a lot of those I would say hurdles as we speak. So outside of Slack or Zoom calls, nobody just wants to connect, and I think that fundamentally needs to be incorporated into how the culture is actually built, right? And so just because you see a Slack message or there's an invite on your calendar doesn't mean that it's now only work. And I think that's what we've been fairly big on, is that our team is kind of like a family that's growing. And I know that that's very cliche to say specifically from a startup point of view, but we do want people to feel like they can trust one another, they understand what role and again, kind of lane that individual is working through. And I think as we go from, again, let's say 10 or 15 employees to 20, 25 and even greater, those lanes become extremely needed, because people fully, they need to be fully aware of kind of what's happening around them, but also have the same strategy around kind of the larger mission. And again, as kind of one of the co-founders and CEO, that's my position, is to make certain that we're all heading in the right direction. And then when we go down to execution, again, I lean heavily on my team as far as kind of being able to get some of that done.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a great point. And again, Alex, before the call, we discussed about how you worked in the corporate world, and you're also building Elude. And we have a lot of listeners who are either they want to get out of their jobs, they want to build something of their own. Would you advise people to leave the jobs, or would you advise them to build something on the side? And what are some of the advice would you give to people who want to get building on to build the next big thing?
Yeah, great question. So, I mean, I was there as well, so I can speak directly. It's almost like I'm speaking directly to myself a few years back when, I had one foot into the corporate world, still kind of working, the 80-hour work weeks in investment banking, and then, on the side, kind of starting and evolving Elude. And, my suggestion is, in the early days when you're, again, exploring those options, definitely start with different side projects, learn kind of how to build and execute quickly. It's one thing to say that you're starting and kind of, thinking about an idea. It's another thing to actually put that into practice, hold calls with, whether it's founders or different teams to start kind of getting your idea, legs. But I think, my biggest advice is, make that leap, and don't do it for the reasons that you probably think at first. So I know in, again, my particular case, you think starting your own business, great. This is all, it's going to be all financial gains. You're going to only be, the top of success, and kind of, being able to kind of control your time and energy is a huge, allure to a lot of people. But I think what really is different from our startup, and specifically kind of our story, is that we jumped because of our passion. And I think I urge a lot of your listeners, and again, a lot of individuals, to find out what really does get them, passionate, and what keeps them up at night, and go work on that. Because, any financial gain or any success that comes from what you're working through, you won't actually be able to feel that until you're actually doing something that you genuinely enjoy to do. And again, I think that comes across, whether that's to our team or to our investors, is that what we're building at Elude is not just a way to book travel. If that was the case, again, it would be boring and just kind of this other, Expedia type, brand. The reason that we're doing this is because this resonates with us. We are fellow travelers. We love to go and explore locations and see different things. And again, I think that that's what I would urge a lot of your listeners to go, is, strive for that passion, and then the money will follow. That's my suggestion.
I think that's a great point. Follow your passion, because if you're not passionate about it, I think you're just going to leave it after a couple of weeks or months. But if you want to, if it's a 10-year journey or a 100-year journey, you need to be really passionate about that particular market.
And exactly, the reason I'm somewhat chuckling is because you're very right. Those first few weeks, months, I mean, in our particular case, the first few years, right? It's not easy to go out and kind of create this new market. And then also too, it's not easy to get buy-in from customers or investors, or again, kind of building and scaling. So, in our case, those first few months, yes, were we able to kind of prove out some early signs? Yes, but it wasn't to the degree at what we were able to do over the course of, a year or two. And I think, again, you having the passion alongside that, allows you to see, 5 years in advance, and still know that you're on the right path there.
No, absolutely. Alex, I quickly want to do the top 3. What's your favorite business book?
So my favorite business book, ironically, again, talking very high level, is The Alchemist. I know it's not directly in line with kind of business fundamentals, but again, kind of this path of life and passion is definitely where, The Alchemist kind of hits home to me.
Got it. And, if you could go back in time when you started Elude, what is the one thing you've done differently?
One thing that I would have done differently is probably left my corporate world a little bit earlier. Again, it's always the grass is always greener on the other side, right? But I think I had one foot in and one foot out for a little bit too long. And I think that was probably more personal belief in myself rather than what was actually transpiring. But I would have left a little bit earlier.
Oh, that's very interesting you say that, because it's always a big leap of faith, because you're living such a big brand, Morgan Stanley. So yeah, that's a great point. And do you have any favorite online tools, for example, Gmail, Slack, Zoom?
Yeah, I mean, in the current form, like Zoom and Gmail has been great. It's funny, I listened to your prior interview with one of the founders over at Superhuman. I'm a religious user of Superhuman, and that's been incredible for kind of from the operating side. And then also Notion. I mean, those two, from our team point of view, it's been really great. If anybody hasn't checked out Notion, it's a great way to kind of capture all of the different documents and materials, and kind of house that in one place, so that not people are going back and forth to try to get access to documents that have already been created. But outside of Superhuman, that saved my life.
Absolutely. I think Vivek, talking about Superhuman was like a product masterclass for me, and how they went about launching the product and the product market fit. Alex, what is the best way people can reach out to you and know more about you?
Yeah, if you're interested, whether it's as a traveler or again as kind of a founder, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. I'm fairly open as far as being able to jump on a call and give a little bit more data or ideas around kind of what we're building. But reach out on LinkedIn. I'm also fairly versed on Instagram and Twitter. So that's Alex Simon, and then my Instagram and Twitter are Alex Elude, ELUDE.
All right, we'll put that in the show notes, Alex. Thank you so much for coming over and speaking to us. I really enjoyed my conversation with you.
Yeah, you as well. Thanks again for having me.